Hi, everyone. Welcome to another episode of the Expat Edge podcast. In this episode, we want to talk about Central Asia and what it looks like as an expat or digital nomad. Welcome to the Expat Edge with Marcus and Matt, where we answer your questions about becoming an expat to help you thrive abroad. So, Matt, you are the guy to talk about Central Asia in that you have lots of experience going from country to country. We have the background of, spending a lot of time in Eastern Europe. I think a lot of people will get a lot of value at what we're going to talk about today because Central Asia is not really a destination that is at the top of all these lists of people, digital nomads and expats look at when they're planning to go abroad. You recently went on quite a long trip and you took your wife and your daughter along this time. And can you kind of give us an overview of where you went and why you chose those locations? Because that's not a typical place that you would go to travel.
Sure, happy to talk about it. So first, I want to just point out Uzbekistan was rated the number one country to visit, I think, for 2023 by Condé Nast, which is a big travel publication. A lot of people are very surprised to hear that. But Uzbekistan is definitely a world-class tourist destination, though up and coming. So yes, we just got back from a 3-week trip to Uzbekistan, Tajikistan, and Kazakhstan. And we spent most of the time actually in Uzbekistan. It's quite a big country. We were in Tashkent, Bukhara, and Samarkand. And then we went to Dushanbe, Tajikistan, and then we went to Almaty, Kazakhstan. So, I'm happy to give all of my thoughts about Uzbekistan as a country. We can also talk about Dushanbe, Tajikistan, as a potential place to live, though I probably would not recommend it for most people. And then Almaty in Kazakhstan, which was quite surprising, but quite familiar at the same time.
Okay, so I have never been to any of those places. I've spent the last year traveling around Western Europe, so I think it will be an interesting conversation when we get down to specifics. But I want to really focus on how these places will be as expats, as
Sure.
people who are trying to make the most of their dollar or euro and have a very comfortable standard of living, but not give too much up from what they're already used to.
Right.
So let's start with kind of the extremes. Like, what is maybe one of the places that you would really consider as a long-term expat destination? And then give us kind of the opposite of what you saw, why you said you wouldn't recommend Tajikistan, for example.
Sure. Okay. So let's just straight away kind of put this on the table that you and I have spent significant time in Russia. I've also spent significant time in Ukraine. We're coming at it from that angle. You've spent time in Germany, and hopefully during this conversation, we can kind of go back and forth about that. You can ask questions about specific things in Uzbekistan or Tajikistan or Kazakhstan, and I'm happy to share that. But just so everybody's aware, we're kind of looking at it through that same lens. We're not coming to Tashkent, Uzbekistan, and comparing it to London, for example. I just want that to be clear. So I personally would recommend of the places that we visited, Tashkent and Almaty, in terms of potential expat destinations. On the channel before, we've had a good friend of mine, Tim, who's been in Almaty, Kazakhstan for, I think, almost 3 years now. And he loves it. I met up with him while I was there, met his wife. They just had a baby. So he's loving it. He told me only great things about his time in Kazakhstan. Almaty is quite a big city. I think there's 3 million, 4 million people, depending on how much of the outskirts of the city you count. Just like with Moscow or Kyiv or any other city. The official population is probably 1.5 million. I wouldn't be surprised. But in the region around the city, it's much, much bigger, and it has a much bigger city feel. So, for example, I would put Almaty probably after Moscow and Kiev in terms of former Soviet cities, in terms of feel. So you've got Moscow, which is just a massive city, nothing like it. Then you've got Kiev, which doesn't feel like a small Moscow, but in terms of development and things that are there, that's the vibe. It's clearly an international city, Kiev. And Almaty, I would say the same thing. It's also absolutely beautiful. Let's remove the fact that we were there in the middle of winter and it was very cold. But you can see the mountains all around the city. And really, there's just a great vibe in Almaty. Granted, you have some of the negatives that you have in Moscow. The streets are not terribly clear. There's lots of people. There is a metro there, but I didn't really ride it. Taxis are incredibly cheap. I mean, much cheaper than in Moscow and other places that have been even cheaper than Serbia, I would say, considering.
Wow.
Yeah. I would say, though, that the cost of living in Almaty, while significantly lower than a place like Moscow, is not cheap, I would say. My buddy Tim, they bought an apartment. I think he told me it cost about $120,000 for 60 square meters in one of the nicest areas of the city. He didn't give me a tour. He's got a newborn baby, which is understandable.
Right.
But he spoke very, very highly of it.
Okay. I just want to pause you real quick because I haven't spent almost any time really in Central Asia. You, on the other hand, you're talking about Almaty and Tashkent from the perspective of already having been you've been to Tbilisi, you've been to Yerevan.
Yeah.
I don't know, have you been to Baku?
I have not been to Baku. Not yet.
But you're coming from not only the Russian-Ukrainian experience that we've had in the past, but also in that region.
Yes.
You can compare it to Tbilisi and Yerevan and potentially other cities. So for me, the only experience I've had with those cultures is in Russia. Like, Georgian food is everywhere, and I've met a lot of people from those areas, but I can't say anything about the area at the current time. So I'm interested in really, like, could someone who has had experience outside of America, maybe in Europe, maybe in Asia, could they get up and move to Almaty or Tashkent and be comfortable, like, standard of living wise?
Almaty is definitely the same level in terms of standard of living and quality of life as Moscow. Honestly, I would say there's probably even some positives because it's a much smaller, more manageable city, yet still the main economic center of Kazakhstan. It's not the capital. Astana is the capital, but Almaty is the largest city. So you have essentially everything that you have in Moscow, except a more manageable sized city. You could make that same argument, though, for Kiev. You cannot make that same argument, in my personal perspective, about Tbilisi. Yes, Tbilisi is fantastic, but it doesn't have nearly the same. Although I haven't been there since 2020 or 2019, so maybe things have gotten better. I mean, Tbilisi, the center is really nice. There's some neighborhoods that are incredibly nice, but it's still kind of rough around the edges. Almaty, I hope we don't offend any Kazakhs here, but it felt exactly like Russia. Even the way that Kazakh people act felt like Russia and Russians. I did not get that vibe in Uzbekistan, in Tashkent, Bukhara, and Samarkand, and we can get into that in a little bit. But the way that people talk,
Can you give us some examples?
Well, you can tell if you're a Russian speaker, like you and I are. You can tell when someone's a native speaker of Russian, and you can tell when someone knows Russian well, but not a native speaker. And you can tell when someone doesn't know Russian well. I didn't encounter anyone in Almaty who was not a native speaker of Russian.
Oh, wow. Okay.
In fact, I don't even think I heard Kazakh once in the week that we were there.
Oh, really?
Yeah. Whereas on the other side of the coin, I don't think I heard Russian from any Uzbeks unless they were talking to someone in Russian who was not Uzbek. But I never heard Russian among two Uzbeks in the 2.5 weeks that we were there. So that's an interesting language dynamic. Now, everybody in Uzbekistan knows Russian to varying levels. Some people are honestly quite close to being a native speaker. But the younger generation, they are much better with English than Russian, generally. But also it depends on class. And I was talking to Tim, my friend in Almaty, and he said that language is definitely a class thing. If you go outside of Almaty and you meet like people in the villages, they don't speak any Russian. Okay. But in the cities, it's definitely Russian first. All of the signs are actually slowly being transitioned to Kazakh, but you can still see a lot of Russian signs. But still, there's a lot of Kazakh signs in Almaty, despite no one speaking Kazakh.
I would assume that's because of the tight business relations between Kazakhstan and Russia, mostly, right? I mean, not of course the history, but
well, I'm sure there's way deeper historical. Yeah.
Right. But I mean, like they continually keep it up because they have a lot of companies like similar companies in the area that operate in Russia as well.
I mean, you say that, but they've made a huge push for Kazakh moving forward. So
Okay.
I don't know if it's gone into effect yet, or to what degree, if laws have been passed. But essentially, they want more people speaking Kazakh in Kazakhstan.
Okay.
I think at this point, you can still go to school completely in Russian. People still do that. But there are Kazakh schools. I think it's just a generational thing. I mean, you saw the same thing with Ukraine. Basically, no one is learning Russian anymore in schools. It's all Ukrainian and English. And in Uzbekistan, it's the same way. It's Uzbek and it's English. If you're wealthier, then you're going to a Russian school and you're learning Russian and English. I mean, I even met some wealthy Uzbeks who did not even really speak Uzbek much.
Oh, really? Okay.
Yeah. So, for example, my colleague, he's from Samarkand, and in Samarkand they actually speak Tajik. So he grew up speaking Tajik, Russian, and English, and so he doesn't speak Uzbek at a native level, and he'll freely admit that.
I didn't know that.
And I imagine there are lots of other people like that too.
Okay, so getting back to the question, what does it look like for a single person to become an expat and live there for a longer period of time?
Well, I mean, it really depends on how mobile you are with your job, or if you're a digital nomad. If you're a digital nomad, it's very easy to set up in Kazakhstan and move the things. It's much like Russia. You can open up a limited liability company, make yourself the general director, pay yourself a salary, and you can grant yourself work authorization. You can stay more or less indefinitely. I don't know the rules about applying for temporary residence permits and whatnot on that basis. We can, we can talk to lawyers and provide more information on that if that's something that people are interested in. But in general, if you're single and you had been to Russia and you like the Russia experience, Kazakhstan is incredibly close. Obviously, the people look different, but the culture, at least in the city, really is very similar to Russia. The way people interact with you, I mean, it's in a way quite rude. You go to the grocery store and nobody ever smiles. Then they just say, "Paket нужен." Do you need a bag? And that's it. That's all you get. Whereas in Uzbekistan, you usually get a smile. I mean, people are very open. Very different culture, in my personal opinion.
Okay. So would you say that Almaty is kind of similar to Moscow in that it's just faster paced, business oriented?
Absolutely. Okay.
And your friend, he has a family there. He's comfortable with his family. Like for a family moving there, what would it be like?
He wants to stay indefinitely. His wife is obviously Kazakh, and he'd like to stay there indefinitely. He says it's great.
Does he speak Kazakh or does he speak Russian?
No, he speaks Russian actually really well, almost as good as we do. So I was impressed. I hadn't spoken Russian with him in 3 years, but my wife and his wife were talking in Russian and at dinner one night, and he was in and out of that conversation. We were speaking primarily English, but yeah, he speaks Russian quite well. So it's no issue for him to get around and do things. So, I mean, to be honest, I didn't test the levels of English. Maybe I should have done more with that. Unfortunately, this is maybe a negative of my experience being in Russia, is that I kind of take for granted how easy it is to get around in these places. I was talking to a good friend about Uzbekistan and Tajikistan. They were like, "Was it easy to get around?" And I said, "Well, yeah, it was. I mean, just told people where we're going, what we're doing. The taxi drivers always took us to the right place." But then I kind of got thinking after we got back, that might not be representative if you speak no Russian, no Tajik, no Uzbek. So I will freely say that. Okay, English though, for example, in Almaty would be the same as Moscow. Okay. If you would feel comfortable recommending Moscow, if not for the war, on an English level basis, then I feel the exact same confidence in Almaty.
Well, I always tell people that if you're going to Russia, you do need to start learning some Russian. Yes, you can get by, but there'll be like frustrating points. But that's kind of anywhere you go, right? There are going to be moments where you're like, "Oh, I wish I could just say this," but then you could still, pull out your translator on your mobile device and get by in little situations. But is there like an expat community? Do you know if
there is? I mean, I wasn't there long enough to go to expat meetups and whatnot, but I'm talking to Tim. I know there are a number of Americans. I work with an American who's been based in Almaty for 30 years. He knows a number of other Americans. I mean, it's probably not like, it's probably better than Moscow these days in terms of expat numbers, without a doubt. But it's not going to be like Paris or Barcelona or Milan in terms of expats. But there are quite a few. And I would say one kind of interesting aspect of Almaty, I got a really nice vibe that things were, positive and moving in the right direction. Things were on the up and up. People were optimistic about the future. Something that, was not in Russia for almost the last 10 years.
Let's say you made the move to Almaty. What are some unique aspects about the city or around the city, activities you could do? What kind of like lifestyle would an expat kind of lead, maybe apart from work?
Well, one huge thing that Almaty has going for it that Moscow doesn't is the outdoors. If you are into the outdoors, skiing, hiking, it is a wonderland. Almaty is at the base. I don't know what the mountain range is, but at the base of some of the highest mountains in Central Asia, there's a world-class ski resort. We didn't ski. My wife was pregnant, but we went and checked that out. It's like $25 for an unlimited lift ticket, and rental equipment is about the same. And it's just fantastic. And there's tons of. It was pretty busy on a Sunday when we were there, but on the Monday there was no one there. So we stayed Sunday night into Monday. Yeah, it was busy, but it wasn't. I didn't see lines that were like hours long to take the lift. But I don't know. There were 20 people deep in the line at the bottom.
I was just in Switzerland 2 weeks ago, and that Saturday that we went, it was so long. The line was so long. It was in Engelberg. I talked to the lady. I was just like, "Do you have any recommendations?" She's like, "Just go down the road to the other lift. It wasn't as high and stuff, but it was plenty for me and my son. So I can imagine that would probably be not as busy as Western Europe.
Right. I actually heard some Americans in the restaurant at the top we went all the way up to the very, very top, and there was a little nice, actually a really nice restaurant there. And I heard a couple Americans in there. So I don't know how many people. One of the lifts up, we had a Czech guy. He heard my wife and I were speaking Russian. And then I said something in English to my daughter, and he says something to me with a very thick Russian accent, but it clearly wasn't. He was European. So I was like, "Oh, where are you from?" He's like, "Oh, Czech Republic." We had a nice chat. He was just there visiting Kazakhstan. Okay. So, there are people that go.
Sure.
But the outdoors, no question. If you're into hiking and the outdoors, Almaty would be just fantastic, because that's a real negative of Moscow, that there's, you go to parks or whatever, walk around on flat ground. But there's no, world-class mountains and ski resorts anywhere nearby. So that's something that I think would be great. But then you also have all of the great things that you have in Moscow, all of the attractions and restaurants and bars. And we had some really good food, I'm not going to lie, in Almaty. We went to this Kazakh restaurant. It was just out of this world. And for three of us, it was like $100. It was just, sounds expensive. But this was like Michelin star Kazakh artisanal restaurant. And it was really, really nicely done inside. Not fancy, but just with a lot. The atmosphere was awesome.
Okay, yeah. Going into kind of the cost. So, can you give us some idea besides like the typical tourist cost that you might do? Do you have any idea of what you could spend on, I don't know, an average place, or maybe having a quick bite to eat?
Yeah, I went to the mall. They actually have this the first street food in the world that was ever Michelin starred in Singapore. They have a couple locations around the world. One was in the mall directly across from our hotel. So I went in there. It was like $4 or $5 to eat at the food court in the mall. So that's the lowest level you're going to get. And it was actually amazing. And then I would say an average restaurant is, we went to one like Asian kind of restaurant one night. How much was that? It was about $30 for the three of us to have like a lemonade, three main dishes, and an appetizer or two. It's quite cheap.
That's reasonable. Yeah.
Yeah, no, it's quite cheap. And then even the upper limit. I mean, really, you could not get any more expensive than this Kazakh restaurant we went to, and that was about $100 for. Okay, let's take my daughter's meal out because it wasn't very much. Let's say $100 for two people with no drinks. Admittedly, my wife is, like I said, pregnant, so no drinks. But $50 for two people to have pretty close to, if not Michelin star quality food. That would have cost $300 or more here in the U.S.
Yeah, that gives us a good idea. Do you have any idea of what it would cost, like, to rent a place or to any other idea of costs?
Yeah, I mean, I asked Tim a little bit about this. About $1,000 to $1,500 a month will get quite a nice place. Now, again, if you want to be like right in the very center of Almaty, it's not going to be $1,000. Especially if you want like 80 square meters or 100 square meters. Mm-hmm. But for a nice, what they call Euro Remont, you're looking at $1,000 to $1,500, depending on where you want to be in terms of the center of Almaty. So, I mean, not super cheap, but actually it's the same as Tashkent. Okay. We haven't got to Tashkent yet, but it's about the same.
Yeah, so I kind of wanted just to kind of get a really good idea of Almaty. Mm-hmm. Well, just for myself, because I want to visit eventually too. But help people understand as an expat destination or a digital nomad destination how realistic it is.
I think just real quick to close out, I think it's easier, obviously, than Russia in many ways. Even before the war, it was always visa free for Americans for the past 5, 6, or 7 years. So you can easily go there, get everything set up, and there's no hassles in that regard. I know the visa is really quite a barrier to Russia, even though it's relatively easy to get. Now with the war, though, there's so many just problems dealing with bureaucracy and whatnot in Russia. And I've had friends who went and stopped at the border, FSB interrogations. I mean, that's not a place that I want to spend my time, let alone recommend to someone else. Kazakhstan has basically all of the positives of Russia without any of the negatives. With the exception of maybe customer service at the basic level is pretty poor, just like in Russia. But at the nice restaurants and hotels, everybody was spectacular from a customer service perspective. Mm-hmm. So I would say if you were interested in Russia and now don't know what to do because of the war, I can definitely recommend Almaty as a place to go instead. And it should be even easier to get set up there. And it's definitely going to be cheaper than Moscow. And one thing we didn't talk about, taxis, incredibly cheap. I mean, anywhere in the city between $4 and $8 in the business class.
What's the traffic like? Are you sitting in traffic?
Oh man, it depends on the day. There are times of day where it's insane.
So it sounds like Moscow.
Yeah, exactly.
Okay, yeah, that's a really good overview. I wanted to compare that with Tashkent because now you say that I'm kind of. I feel like I got a feeling of Almaty based on my experience in Moscow and parts of Russia. Yeah. But you said Uzbekistan was very relaxed.
Yeah.
And less people spoke Russian.
Yeah.
Did you mainly speak Russian around everywhere?
Yeah, I did. I mean, we stayed at one of the nicer hotels, and I spoke English with them just because they seemed eager to practice their English, and they probably don't get a whole lot of people from the U.S. So
the Uzbeks that I've met were extremely hospitable. Did you get the same? Is that characteristic of
maybe estimation of Uzbeks? It's all of the positives of Russian culture, of which there are many, and then combined with the kind of Turkish hospitality, which is something, Russians are quite hospitable, but you've got to get to know them first.
Sure.
But the Turks and the Uzbeks, in a similar way, are hospitable from the very start. So, everyone's always smiling. If you can't speak Uzbek, they're not like, what the heck, come on. Like, you get in Moscow, you go somewhere and they don't speak English, and they're just like, oh my God, this guy's ruining my day. Whereas in Uzbekistan, everywhere, if they didn't speak Russian, there were only a few cases. I mean, they were very, very, happy, like, oh my gosh, foreigners here, trying to explain the menu at a restaurant, for example. We went to a couple off the beaten path places, and people were just incredibly friendly. So you have that, but then you also have, once you get to know them, they're also very, very nice, good friends. I work with a number of Uzbek colleagues, so I'm basing this not just on 2.5 weeks in Uzbekistan, but on my experience with them as well. And very, very helpful. Anytime, if you look like you can't figure something out, someone would always ask, do you need help? So
Yeah.
it was just really nice.
My interactions have been very similar, mostly in Russia, but I'll ask for advice, or I'd be on the street or in a taxi. And this last time when I went to Moscow in December, I got an Uzbek taxi driver, and he didn't want to charge me extra for kind of helping me find the building. And I was like, take some extra as a tip. And he was like, no. And he, very, very hospitable. And so that's what I think of when I think of the hospitality.
That's incredibly accurate. I found myself really almost wanting to tip. It's not really customary. And they were always so thankful. And when they went above and beyond, I gave a tip. They always tried to refuse it first. And I said, no. You help me with this, you help me with that. And, they would take it in the end. But they were just so
sincere,
really relaxing. Yeah, sincere. And they were not once did I have a confrontational interaction in Uzbekistan in 2.5 weeks. Literally not once. I mean, we dealt with people who were exchanging money by the tourist sites, and I'm not gonna lie, in the first 24 hours in Kazakhstan, I had 2 confrontational encounters over just stupid stuff. And it reminded me so much of living in Russia that I was like, I remember why those days that were just ridiculous in Russia. One guy showed up and he did not want to take my daughter in the taxi. And his reasoning was he didn't have a child seat. Okay, reasonable. I went and I got the child seat, I brought it. And then he just flipped out. He's like, no, I can't take your daughter. I'm like, yes, you can. And then he started yelling at me and swearing at me. And I lost it on him. Wow. And I called Yandex Taxi, and they refunded me immediately and said they would speak with him. So, but just why? He could not articulate even why he didn't want to take my daughter. If he didn't want her to put her feet on the seat or whatever, he could have just said that and said, order another taxi, please. That's it. Instead, we got into this, yelling match over it. I mean, just stupid. Yeah. In any case, not once in Uzbekistan. People were very, very reserved in a good way, and not trying to create issues.
Okay. So let's talk about the difference in standard of living and cost. I've talked to several people. I have a good friend here in Germany who spent a lot of time in the military, and he's been to Uzbekistan so many times, and he's just like, it's so hospitable, it's so dirt cheap. What's the kind of parity there between Almaty and Tashkent, for example?
I talked to some of my colleagues in Tashkent. Rent in a nice building is not cheap. So it's $1,000 to $1,500, similar to Almaty. But everything else is so cheap. I mean, I don't think we even had a single business class taxi that went over $6. Yeah, in 2.5 weeks. I mean, I literally cannot even order a taxi to show up at my door for less than $6 in the US. As soon as they arrive, the meter's already higher than $6.
Right. Yeah, here in Germany, I go 40 minutes to the airport, and it's like 80 euros at least. And I'm just like, I'll just drive my car, and I drive my car to the nearest station, pay 3 euros to go to the station, from the station right to the underground to the airport. I'm like, I'll just carry my suitcase a little bit. So I wanted to, before I forget, I wanted to go off on a little tangent because I was thinking about this when you started talking about tipping, and it makes me feel good. And I see that you were in the same situations where you were genuinely wanted to show your appreciation for somebody who treated you so well. You're ready to tip them.
Yes.
Right? Even if it's not the local culture.
Yes.
I just wanted to say that when I'm in that situation, especially in a place where the cost of the services are very affordable, I don't make a ton of money, but when we're in those countries, it makes me feel good that I can show my appreciation in those ways, right?
Yes, and it's not expected.
Right, and not necessarily to go around and flaunt, yeah, I can afford this, but genuinely say, no, you did me a huge favor. Please accept my appreciation. Because how else are you going to show your appreciation? I mean, that's just one method of showing.
Exactly.
So I wanted to point out that when you're spending time in a country where you can afford a little bit more, or maybe a lot more, it's just nice to get really great service and be able to show your appreciation. Whereas if you don't have a huge budget and you're going to like Switzerland, and it's like, I'm already paying, lots of money for this dinner. I can't afford to tip, but even if I wanted to, right? But in those kinds of countries and cities, Central Asia, Eastern Europe, I'm sure all over Asia, it's like, you treated me, you treated my family so well. Here's my appreciation. I want to show that appreciation. That's one great thing about a lot of these countries that are very inexpensive.
Yes, and I will say we had not the same experience in Kazakhstan. I don't think we had any taxi driver that I thought above and beyond. I actually think that we had, out of the probably 10 or 15 rides we took, only 4 of them were satisfactory. I mean, they pick us up at the place where we ordered it in the app and took us to the place that we ordered it. I mean, even that was difficult. We ordered a taxi when we were in Kazakhstan business class in the mountains. He was, I don't know, a 2-minute drive away. He just didn't want to come down the road to pick us up. We had to walk up an icy hill. He's like, no, I'm parked here. Like, but I'm standing in front of an empty parking spot. He's like, I'm here. Just like, what the act?
On the phone or?
Yes.
Jeez.
Yes. And then another guy was just screaming and yelling at other people when we were stuck in traffic. He was rolling down, -20, rolling down his window, screaming at people to stop cutting him off. And then he cut off the next car. And you're just like, come on. So what the heck?
But when you ordered the taxi in the app, is it Yandex Taxi as well?
Yes.
So that's also a great thing. I was surprised when we went to Serbia, Yandex Taxi was working. So you're using Yandex Taxi, very accurate, pinpointing your location, and it's like, no, I'm not gonna take you, or I'm not gonna come to you, basically.
Yeah, and my geolocation was on the point where I ordered him to. He's just like, no, not doing it. I'm here. Anyway, going back to Uzbekistan, though, from that, I mean, we didn't have any of those experiences in 2.5 weeks. Not a single confrontational argument with taxi drivers, with service people, only positive experiences. But I'm not going to lie. I mean, Uzbek culture, in my personal opinion, was more interesting because it was new. It was kind of novel. It wasn't anything like Russia, even though people spoke some Russian. But yeah, it's 2 different countries. They're side by side with 2 different countries.
So so you talked about Almaty being, for people who love the outdoors. What about Tashkent, for example?
History. I mean, it was on the ancient Silk Road, and you have all of the historical sites are well preserved. The old historical town centers, except for in Tashkent. So that earthquake destroyed the whole, historical part of Tashkent in the 60s, and of course they built it back up in the great Soviet style of Khrushchevkas and very Soviet-esque looking buildings. So, I mean, there are some historical buildings that are still in Tashkent, but like the city itself looks almost like a Russian city, especially if you compare it to Samarkand and Bukhara, which are historical cities and really haven't been touched.
Okay.
Yeah.
What about the nature? Like, what's the scenery like?
Well, I mean, Tashkent is actually on the other side of the mountains from Almaty, so you can very easily, it's a bit further away, so like to get to the mountains and the ski resort from the center of Almaty, it's like 30 minutes. From Tashkent up into the nicer ski resorts, it's like 90 minutes. So you have much of the same sort of natural beauty around.
I see. One thing I didn't ask about is like internet access and communications, things like that. Did you see a noticeable?
I never had an issue. Never had an issue. The Wi-Fi was fast at the hotel. The Wi-Fi was fast on my phone. Admittedly, I used Google Fi, which is a U.S. service provider. I mean, it connects to the local ones. I have LTE absolutely everywhere.
Well, as a point of reference, anytime I was in Russia, it was great as far as internet. Mobile internet, if you had a good provider, there's multiple providers to choose from, multiple plans. The options are endless. So I never had an issue in Russia. Germany, it's not as great, but now...
No, come on. Don't say Russia. Moscow. Sorry to cut you off, but Moscow, absolutely. If you just get on the train going out of Moscow, the connection is terrible.
Same thing in Germany. If you're on the train, like I've ridden the train quite a bit, trying to work on my computer, and it will go in and out of LTE, and I kind of...
Yeah, most of Russia is 2G outside the cities.
Yeah, but at least, like, I've been in smallish towns in Russia, like Siberia, and still gotten a good...
No. Any like population center has 4G. But like if you go to the direct, I mean, even where my wife's family live, you go from the little the town of 100,000 people or city, and you go 4 kilometers to the Derevnya where all the dachas are, it's 2G.
Well, if you're in a village.
Yeah, but it's 4 kilometers from civilization where you got 4G. Come on. I mean, in the US, you have 4G literally everywhere.
True.
Literally everywhere.
I was going to say, though, compare it to Turkey, because when I'm in Turkey working, like I'm trying to just do some basic, uploading, downloading, video conferencing, it's kind of annoying because it's the upload speed is not great. Download speed is fine, 35, 50. Upload is like 4, and that's good. So that's why I ask. In those bigger cities,
I never had any problems. I wasn't downloading 100 gigabyte video games or movies or whatever, but I never had any problems with video conferencing. I never had any problems with downloading YouTube videos for flight, whatever.
Okay. So. But you also did some traveling around the areas. You went to Tajikistan. In the beginning, I asked you kind of give us the polar, the opposites of where you would recommend going and where you wouldn't. You said Tajikistan. Walk us through some of the reasons why you say that's not a place for expats or digital nomads.
Well, I mean, Tajikistan is just way off the beaten path. I mean, there are no international airlines really that fly there, maybe just Turkish. What happens is that you just there's not a lot of development there. There's literally no Western brands. I'm not saying that that's a marker of development, but it is a marker of how open of an economy it is. There's clearly a dictator there. His picture is on every building. We went to one of the national museums. He's everywhere. There's even a portrait of him with the only couch in the entire building, just looking at the portrait of the president of Tajikistan. I mean, it's that kind of place.
Yeah, you sent me a picture of that.
So, is it interesting? Absolutely. I'm happy we went.
So more as a tourist.
Yeah, I mean, if you're based in Tashkent or in Almaty, I think it would be strange not to ever visit Dushanbe. Or even if you don't want to visit Dushanbe, you could go to Dushanbe and take a car. The mountains are supposed to be, just world class in Tajikistan. So there's lots of nature to see there. But as an expat destination, I think you just write it off because there's going to be issues with censorship on the internet. I mean, I didn't encounter anything. Nothing was blocked that I noticed. But I find it hard to believe that it's an open society, given that it's clearly a dictator-run country out there, authoritarian. The average salary, I think, is like $100 a month.
Okay.
I've been to Kenya and I've been to Ethiopia. Of course, there are areas in both of those countries that are significantly worse than Tajikistan, especially Dushanbe. but you can tell that those countries are still more developed than Tajikistan.
Okay, I didn't expect that kind of radical difference.
Now, I will say the people were absolutely amazing in Tajikistan. One of the reasons I wanted to go was because I had so many Tajik taxi drivers in Moscow who always said, their people were so friendly, the food was so good, and it was really interesting to visit. I would recommend people who want to see stuff off the beaten path. That is the most off the beaten path place I've ever been, for sure. And like I said, I've been to Oman, I've been to Ethiopia, I've been to Kenya. And these places are still on the beaten path compared to Tajikistan.
Okay. Yeah, that gives us a really good idea of what places to go to, what places to avoid as expats. I mean, any other maybe cities that you visited that you thought, okay, maybe I could stay here long term, or this could be a destination for an expat? Because I know you went to Samarkand and some other places.
Yeah, Samarkand and Bukhara are the only two places we haven't talked about. Amazing tourist destinations. They're probably not places I would want to live. That's not to say they don't have their own charm. If you're into smaller cities, like for me, I want to be near medical facilities of some kind. And one thing we didn't touch on was medical care. We did test out the medical facilities in Tashkent, which we can talk about. But let's real quick finish on Samarkand and Bukhara. But they're a bit off the beaten path. They're much smaller cities than Tashkent. People were incredibly friendly, but there are no, in the center of Bukhara, there's no sidewalks. There's little tiny roads, and you're walking there, and there's cars whizzing by. It's not really the vibe that I would. I mean, it's fascinating to be there for a few days, but it's not the kind of thing I would want to deal with every day. It feels less civilized is not the right word. But I mean, it's completely different than Tashkent. I mean, Tashkent feels like Dubai compared to Dushanbe or Bukhara.
Wow. Okay. Well, what did you?
Where everything is laid out. You've got sidewalks. You can walk everywhere. There's a metro system. But there's just going to be things you're not going to be able to find. For example, food. If you love Uzbek food, you're still going to get tired of it if you live in Bukhara or Samarkand, because there are no other options. Everything is just drenched in lamb fat. It's a very heavy cuisine. It is incredibly tasty. I mean, I would recommend traveling there just for the food. It's that good, but it's heavy, and it's not terribly varied. It's kebabs, it's rice, it's bread, it's manti, which these kind of dumplings. But yeah, it's not something you're going to eat every day forever. And in these smaller cities, I think in Bukhara, there's one Indian restaurant. There might not even be an American style restaurant or European style restaurant, maybe one or two. But in a city of 600,000 people, it's quite surprising. You can find Russian food everywhere, obviously, but those things I think would get boring to me. And then the medical facilities are, Dushanbe. There's literally not a single private clinic in the entire country, not a single one.
Yeah, I wouldn't want to get sick in a place like that.
Right. No, I would put Tajikistan literally number one country I would not want to get sick in. I would rather get sick in Ethiopia.
I honestly wouldn't expect that. My interactions with people from Tajikistan, again, have been in Russia, incredibly hospitable, and they have all said, "Oh, it's beautiful." I'm sure it is, but there's a reason they go to Russia to work. As taxi drivers.
I told you the average salary in Dushanbe is $100 a month.
Yeah,
$100 a month.
So, but in Almaty and Tashkent, what are the medical facilities like?
So we didn't test anything in Almaty. I'll be honest, but in Tashkent, my wife went to see a specialist because it was much easier to do than in the U.S. She wanted to talk to somebody in Russian. She had a few appointments. She did an ultrasound for her pregnancy there. They got her in literally within I called to make an appointment. They're like, "Yep, you can come in today." And then she wasn't feeling well one day, and she went and they saw her the same day. I think it cost me $150 for 2 doctor's appointments, 2 ultrasounds, and lab work.
That's crazy.
Same day. You cannot even go and do an ultrasound in the U.S. unless it's a pregnancy ultrasound. Then that's obviously free. any other ultrasound for less than $150 with insurance. With insurance.
Yeah.
So I don't know. Again, I would always caveat this with I wouldn't want to have some rare form of cancer, or probably cancer at all, in Uzbekistan. But for any routine medical issues, it would be fantastic. I mean, you don't need to have medical insurance. You just pay out of pocket. You can go to a private clinic where people are respectful and will get you in on the same day for just $10 or $20 for an appointment.
I suspect it's similar to my experience in Russia, where I went to the clinic. My kid was sick. Even though my wife is Russian, they're Russian citizens, so they have claim to free medical services. I looked down one hall, it was the free hall, then down the paid hall. Mm-hmm. The line down the free hall was, I don't know, 5-6 people. The line down the paid hall was 0. There was just nobody at the door. Yeah. So I'm like, okay, let's go see how much it is. We go over there within 5 minutes. Paid with my card. At that time, it was like 1,200 rubles to see the doctor. So if it's anything like that, then I would pay out of pocket every time, because you save so much time and you get treated very well.
But that's the thing. I mean, even if you earn the absolute minimum salary in Russia, the time that you pay for your healthcare is incredible. I mean, it could be weeks, and it could be literally standing in line for an entire day just to see a doctor. Yeah. I did it. So, I mean, people can, I know people like to talk in our comment section about how great everything is in Russia provided by the government. This is not one of them. And unless you've got experience.
The problem is that it's not blanketed. It's not like here's the standard and every clinic lives up to that standard. For example, we went to, in 2000, when was that? 2020 or 21? We went to St. Petersburg. My son broke his clavicle. We went to some local clinic. We got in same day. They were super great, and they didn't charge us a thing. Unfortunately, you can't expect that at every place. I mean, that's
right. Well, that's what I was going to say. I'm not insinuating that there are no good private public clinics in Russia.
Yeah, that's the problem. Is you're just going to have these up and down, and you're like, oh, that was great one day, but it's kind of characteristic of your experience in Russia too. Like, it's just great and not so great, right? It's just up and down, and there's no like uniform standard what you're used to in the West.
No, well, there is a uniform standard on paper. I'm sure of it. The problem is, like always in Russia, practice.
Right. So, I mean, it's good to know though that in these places it's affordable to pay out of pocket for routine stuff, and that's what I always said about Russia as well. Said if you're going to Russia, get your emergency medical coverage, whatever that is, but you can just do I did a ton of dental work in Russia, and would always call my brother, who's a dentist in Las Vegas, how much do you charge for the how much
is this reasonable?
I'm like, oh, I'm getting this deal. So I mean, I assume that in these bigger cities, you can find very, very good quality services as well for routine.
Yeah, like I said, routine medical care. I was very surprised. They even spoke English, by the way, at the hospital.
So was this a private clinic though? Okay.
Yeah, of course.
It's not like a public clinic that has private paid services.
No.
Okay.
100% private.
How did you go to those? Like, were you recommended?
We just Googled them. Wow. We just Googled them. Both different. We went to 2 different medical centers. So we tried more than one, and it was just from Google.
Okay. Interesting. Yeah. So, I mean, like I said, this discussion is meant to kind of give you a better understanding of what to expect as an expat or digital nomad living, a longer period of time in Central Asia. I had never, been to these places. Matt, you have a lot of experience, more than me, in those areas. I have more experience in Western Europe, and so it's really interesting to see the difference in all of these areas. And I honestly can't wait to go, based on what we talked about before and in this discussion, just to see for myself. Could I live there with my family? If I were single, what would it be like? But I hope this discussion really helps a lot of people understand whether they want to consider Central Asia, some of the Kazakhstan, Uzbekistan, maybe not Tajikistan, but narrow it down on a list if you're compiling a list of places and destinations to go through. Have we missed anything that you wanted to add before we end?
No, I just thought maybe I'd close out by saying, there is one significant downside that we didn't talk about for both of these places, and it's location,
Yes.
Physical location. I mean, it was an 18-hour flight from Houston to Tashkent. And it's 18 hours no matter where you're going in the U.S.
What was your route?
It was through Istanbul. So it was 13 hours to Istanbul and then 5 hours, and then you have a layover. So it's 24 hours. And the time zone is 11 hours different, or 12 hours different from Houston and Almaty, and 11 hours in Tashkent. It's rough. So that is a significant, let's say, disadvantage over even a place like Kiev, where it's 7 hours different. Before the war, there was a direct flight from New York. There is a direct flight to Tashkent, actually, from New York. It's like 11 hours, so that's a little bit better. If you live in New York and you need to come back to the U.S. to New York, it's going to be more or less okay. But if you live anywhere else, you've got to transfer on Qatar. No, actually, I don't even think Qatar flies. It's Turkish.
I saw a bunch out of Dubai to Samarkand, Dubai to Tashkent, Almaty.
But I don't know. I think those are low-cost airlines. Probably they're probably not.
The main ones don't.
It's not a place. No, not Samarkand. No.
Okay.
So in Uzbekistan, you're going to get Tashkent.
Yeah, when I was looking, it was Dubai. I would have had to fly from where I am if I didn't take a Lufthansa or a major airline. I would have had to fly to Dubai and then Samarkand and Tashkent, but there were direct flights from Dubai.
Okay, so from Houston, you have Turkish or Emirates. That's literally it, with one stopover. Not even Lufthansa. Probably because the flight gets in at a...
Okay, so it's difficult to get in and out of these places. Not difficult, but you have limited options.
It's not expensive, though. I would say that the prices are...
So you have reasonably priced options, but just limited options. What about getting around in the region?
Well, you basically can't go over land. If you look on a map, Almaty and Tashkent look very, very close. Tashkent and Dushanbe, they look very, very close. But you essentially have to fly because of mountains.
Okay.
So you can take a 45-minute flight from Tashkent to Dushanbe, which we did, or you can drive for like 8 hours around the mountains, and
right.
That's not even counting the border. People told me, it's an all-day affair.
Okay, but there are local options to fly.
There are. Yep. We tried Tajik National Airlines. Don't recommend. Uzbek Airlines. Surprisingly, very, very good. It was brand new planes. They had the TVs in the seat backs. Really, really nice plane. We also flew Air Astana, which is, I think, technically a low-cost airline. Also, really great. Nothing. I definitely do not recommend Soman Air, which is basically Air Tajikistan.
You survived.
It was fine. We took off and landed, but if you look in like least safe airlines in the world, that's not on the list of no fly, but they're not allowed to fly to Europe. They're not allowed to fly to the US for their safety record. So, and it's not because they've had crashes. It's because they don't have the right maintenance schedules and whatnot in place. So that's there haven't been crashes, but
we haven't had crashes. Why should we?
Not, I guess,
provide maintenance.
Right.
Oh my gosh.
So yeah, you basically have to fly. So the only huge drawback to the whole region is its physical location. Even if you want to, I think there might be a flight to Tokyo from Almaty, but that's still like 6 or 7 hours.
I'm in Germany. I'm ahead of you guys when you're in Houston. Then you flew over me, went to Uzbekistan, and then you were in bed by the time I was thinking, I'll chat with Matt.
Yeah, dinner time. I'm already sleeping. Yeah.
Yeah. So obviously, we talk a lot about keeping your the work in the West and making that work for you while you are living in a lower cost of living place. So if you are working for Western companies, then that time difference would be difficult.
Exactly. So we'll close on this. My good friend Tim, if you guys want to hear more about his work experience and managing his hours, few people will have watched to this point. But if you are interested, we can bring him back on and talk about this. But he essentially works from 2 p.m. in the afternoon to 2 in the morning.
Oh,
or no, so I'm sorry, 5 p.m. to 2 a.m.
I mean,
yeah.
I'm not a morning person, but I
with a newborn.
I'm not a morning person for sure, but I would not want the swing. I had the evening shift. I had that shift once, and I never wanted to go back. It was killer. So
yeah. So anyway, maybe to close out, I'll say if you are interested in Eastern Europe, I think you should absolutely consider Central Asia. Tashkent and Almaty, great choices if you want to have really high quality of life with most or all of the amenities that you've come to expect in Eastern Europe. Everything is also much cheaper. Rent, maybe aside, rent can be expensive to have a really nice place. But hey, there's always a trade-off somewhere, right? And that combined with the location is the trade-off.
And whether you want a Russian-ish experience, lots of these places still speak Russian, and you can take Russian courses. If not, you can get by with English. So I think that's a very unique thing about these places where you can learn a language that is very widely spoken, but you can also lean on your English as well. So thank you so much for sharing your experience, Matt, and it was fascinating to learn more about these places. I hope that was very helpful to you guys. Join us in the next episode where we'll talk more about all things expat.
And my next trip is to Cairo, and we'll have a report after that too. We'll see you next time.
That would be completely different.
This was the Expat Edge with Matt and Marcus. We hope you enjoyed the video. Visit theexpatedge.com for even more content that will help you thrive abroad. You can submit your ideas for video topics and sign up for free at theexpatedge.com. See you there.